Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and I am not alone, as you've probably guessed. Well, maybe you didn't. Either way, I'm not alone. I'm here with Jon. Say hello, Jon.
I'm stuck in a cloud. Ah!
Well, now I can't use that as an outtake, can I? Damn it, Jon. But yes, today, as you've no doubt distinguished from the title, we are going to be discussing the matter of cloud-based gaming on the Nintendo Switch. Because last week during the Direct, they announced that Control was coming to Switch in a cloud form. And I was actually off last week, which is maybe why this didn't happen. Who knows? But either way, we're doing it now, so we're doing it now. But we've both tried out Control on the Nintendo Switch using the free trial mode because we're cheap. And we've tried both modes. There are two modes. One which prefers performance, the other one which prioritizes graphics. So you get two arguably different experiences, but we didn't actually have that much of a distinction between the two, did we, Jon? I mean, feel free to kick things off, as it were.
Yeah, so we tried both of them back to back, and we're on a call at the same time, just kind of communicating our experiences. And I started with quality, and you started with performance. And
that's right.
To be honest, I didn't notice a big difference between the two. And they don't really tell you what exactly is different. So from what I noticed, performance definitely ran better, as you expect from a performance, but the quality difference in quality wasn't drastic enough for me to really choose it. I didn't really notice a big difference in resolution or in graphics. In both cases, the game kind of left a bit to be desired from a graphical standpoint.
Yeah, it was more than anything. I mean, there are certain visual effects going on and things like that. The shadows are nice and crisp, except that's one thing I did notice between the two modes. Shadows seemed a bit better in enhanced graphics as opposed to performance mode, but that was about it. And I think you noticed the hair was actually appeared worse because it appeared quote-unquote sharper in graphics mode, but that didn't help.
In both cases, the hair has a lot of dithering. I'm not sure if that's just Control in general, but yeah, I played in quality to begin with, and that's the first thing that stood out, is the hair's just very jaggy. And then went to performance, and it's still jaggy there, so I'm not really sure if I had the choice. I'm not sure I would go for quality in any situation. So it just kind of played better on performance, and it still looked good enough to play through. Yeah,
I mean, it's one of those things where I think there are so many particle effects and things like that in this game. Like, I don't know very much about this game being such a Nintendo bodkin myself. I do have a PS4 and indeed an Xbox One, which I really need to turn on at some point. But this is a game that, from what I can tell, relies very much on a lot of particle effects, a lot of granular detail, which you just cannot get to come through properly when you're streaming it, because it's a video signal that is being compressed and sent over the internet. And I think that was the biggest issue that we faced overall. It certainly was for me. But the input latency, Jon, input latency.
Yeah, that was remarkable, actually. I started off playing on my 2.4 gigahertz band on my router, and it wasn't good. So then I switched to the 5 gigahertz one, and all of a sudden, yeah, it worked near natively. It was just crazy how soon that you flick the stick and it occurs on screen. I've played a bit with cloud interfaces before with xCloud, and that's pretty great too. But from this company, I wasn't expecting that much, because in the past all they've really done is, in Japan, they've done Assassin's Creed Origins and Resident Evil 7, which I've tried to experience, but it doesn't quite let you on the server if you're outside of Japan. So the actual playability was pretty crazy. Like, I was making headshots pretty darn well.
Yeah, I must admit that, again, in a way, I kind of forgot that the input wasn't... It was almost like in a way, I was watching a compressed version of the game running on the Switch. Not from a visual point of view, but from an input point of view. That was genuinely really impressive. I was using wired, so I was probably using arguably the best connection that I could get in my home. But yeah, I was genuinely impressed. Well, that was in performance mode. I did notice when it came to aiming in enhanced graphics mode, I couldn't give you any numbers, and I couldn't really sort of pin it down exactly in terms of how it felt, but it just wasn't as responsive. It really wasn't. It was the only way I can describe it is laggy, slightly laggy. Not unplayable, I would say, but I definitely preferred it in performance mode. It was much more impressive.
I will say, I definitely admire the way that they're doing this, though, because you don't have to pay anything until you've played the trial through. And if you paid £35 for this, which is the full price, and you had a bad experience, that's £35 down the drain. So I love that they allow you to actually trial this out and make sure it works before committing to that purchase.
Yeah, I think that's the fairest way they could possibly have done it, and I think that is genuinely laudable, because if you do have an awful connection, but you don't really know it because you don't really do anything like this, because realistically, cloud-based gaming is still really quite a new thing. So people may not be aware of how their, what their internet connection is like when it comes to something like this. So I think that's a very fair way of doing it, and props to them for that. For that part at the very least.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting prospect for the future of the Switch as well, because we know Hitman 3 is also coming at some point. So we've got both Hitman 3, we've got Control, we've got Resident Evil 7 in Japan, Assassin's Creed Origins in Japan, and data mined from the website Resident Evil 3 Cloud Edition. How deep is this going to go?
Yeah, I suppose it may well be that... Well, I have no idea what the kind of upfront cost for something like this, or indeed running the servers, is, because you've got, how many different people playing the same game at the same time, which surely must be a huge drain just from a purely sort of hardware point of view. And I will admit, I kind of wish that if we were, if we were paying for this cloud version of the game, that on a wired connection, because I would say that I have an absolutely reasonable connection. It is not amazing, unfortunately, just where I live, that's how it is, but it is very stable, and it is overall pretty good. I think I'm on about sort of 40 or 50 down and about 9 up, or about 10 up or something, but as a result, it means uploading videos takes far longer than it should do, but more than reasonable for something like this. I mean, would you agree? You're on a better connection than I am.
Yeah, slightly. So I'm on 200 up and 200 down and 20 up. I wish it was 200 up.
I wish I had 200 up every single day.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we do have pretty good connections for the UK. And yeah, it ran really well. But speaking on the hardware side, though, we actually omitted one big thing: the queues. Before you can start playing, you have to wait. And when I first booted it up, I think I was placed at 16 in the queue. And I think the way it works is I have to wait for 16 people to stop playing until I can play. To be honest, the wait wasn't that long, but just the prospect of queuing up to play a game isn't something I want to do with something that I've purchased.
No, I agree. I mean, for something like online matchmaking, it's the nature of the beast. It's just how it has to be. You have to have other people online. You have to play with them. But this is a single-player experience. I don't think Control has any multiplayer, does it?
No, and also we're playing around 10 AM in the morning UK time. This should be the time where the fewest people should be queuing up.
Yeah, it is like super dead. I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but I believe around about 8 to 9 AM in the UK is the quietest time on the internet globally. So we're not that far from that, so it should still be a pretty damn quiet time. Most of America is still asleep. Certainly, a lot of America that would, be playing games and things like that. And I'm just rewatching the gameplay here, and as we're chatting, and I can absolutely see a difference. The shadows, 100%, are far, far better in enhanced graphics mode, but everything else, the overall clarity of the image is exactly the same. It's still blurry, it's still very, very soft, because it's being streamed, and I would say in certain instances as well, washed out.
Yeah, I was quite impressed with how the blacks looked. In a lot of streaming applications, blacks just look very pixelated.
Yeah.
And it looked pretty good here, but as a whole, I think you're absolutely right. There is a washed out look to the image. I guess just the fact that it's on Switch at all, though, is still something. There's still value in that, especially because not everyone owns other platforms. And the Switch, as a beast, is still very versatile. You can play this, even though it's being streamed, you can play it in handheld mode and docked still.
Yeah, well, I would hope so. You're going to run into potentially issues with handheld when it comes to your own Wi-Fi connection rather than wired, but you had a pretty good time.
Yeah, if you're on 5 gigahertz, yeah. But yeah, on the standard band, it wasn't great. So I think you've got to make sure, and this is the same for xCloud as well, make sure you're on 5 gigahertz if you have it.
I'd say we should really try this using a phone hotspot. I think that would be
That's the ultimate
very
test.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one area that I don't think we've properly touched on, and we've sort of talked loosely about performance, but the biggest thing was certainly in enhanced graphics mode was frame drops. It is not a consistent frame rate, certainly in enhanced graphics mode. I would argue that performance mode is playable. It's playable, and if it were out on, if it was running natively on the Switch, not necessarily with the graphics that we see, because that's unreasonable, but if in theory it was running natively on the Switch, and it had those kind of frame drops, I can turn a blind eye to that. But in enhanced graphics mode, even though it's still just being streamed over the internet, and I don't know if it was a higher resolution or not, but it dropping way more frames, and it was far more noticeable, and to a degree that some people would maybe argue that it was, I suppose, unplayable. I wouldn't argue that myself, but some people are, far more sensitive to this sort of thing than even you or I who work in video, are, which it's not great, is it?
It's not. Especially given the price as well. This is a £35 game on PSN. For no discounts on PSN, it's £25. So we're paying £10 more for a cloud version. And for that, I would expect it to be top-notch. And yeah, the quality mode, I could definitely see a lot of drop frames. And I'm not entirely sure if it was server-side or if it's because of bandwidth. It's hard to tell if it's actually lagging or if the hardware that's streaming it is lagging. But in either case, I wouldn't go for that.
No, in fact, I've just actually rewatched a part in it just as I came up to a door, and, sort of there's some more stuff going on the screen. It's dropping frames, which I believe maybe is server-side. It is very hard to tell because we're just viewing it over the internet. But it's the same sort of areas where I would expect frames to be dropped, rather than streaming, where in theory, surely it would just become... You just get more artifacts, I would have thought. You get artifacting rather than frame drops. I mean, whenever you're watching something like a live stream or something, it doesn't drop frames, does it? Unless it's happening on the, on the side of the person streaming. You get artifacts, you get compression coming up. So I'm really not certain. Again, I'm not an engineer in this kind of thing, so I could be entirely wrong about that, but just from a player's point of view, I don't expect this.
Yeah, on xCloud, whenever there's any kind of lag, it kind of stops for a moment and then just comes back in. You don't really get drop frames, you just kind of get a pause in the end, almost like a buffer, I suppose. But because you can't really buffer a game, you just kind of teleport to where you'd be a few seconds later. And that's not what I had in Control. It definitely feels like drop frames, which is strange.
Yeah.
But just on the positive side, though, in terms of the performance mode, I think if you gave me the streamed version, and if a native version existed, you gave me that too, I'm not entirely sure if I could tell you which one is being streamed. And I think that's how impressive the input latency is.
Yeah, it is. That is, honestly, that was the part that I was fully expecting to be the worst. So from a playability point of view, this has really impressed me. So again, certainly the performance mode. I would absolutely play the performance mode, given the choice between the two. I don't think the enhanced graphics are worth it. Yeah, the shadows are less pixelated, and but come on, it's running on a Switch. You can't expect grand things, except that this is a cloud version, so maybe you should, I don't know.
It's interesting to see what the future's going to be like, because we know Resident Evil 3 is very likely coming. But what more is there going to be? And is this even a sustainable choice for the Switch? Because on one hand, it's giving us games that otherwise wouldn't be ported. I'm sure Control, maybe they could have pulled it off, but it'll be grandly compromised. So I'm kind of for this, as long as it's not getting in the way of a native port that could have happened. Like with Resident Evil 3, maybe they could have pulled it off, but I don't think it would be an ideal experience. So I'm kind of okay with that version existing some point in the future. So I'm so torn on this, because I don't really want this to be another flagpole of what Switch can do, but if it's giving us games that otherwise couldn't have come, then sure.
Yeah, again, I feel very torn, the same as you, because it is that situation where I will always prefer a game being run natively. It will always be a better experience because, I mean, arguably you could say the Switch, wouldn't have the power to make the game look like this, but given all the artifacts and the frame drops and the softness of the image, yeah, I don't imagine the Switch could even look as good as performance mode, maybe, but even then, it's just that sort of, that security knowing that you own this game. When the servers, go offline, because in 10 years' time, I imagine, maybe not even 10 years' time, you won't be able to play Control on the Switch. You won't, unless there's a native version that gets released, because this will not be sustained for that length of time. It requires far too much server power, I'm sure, to keep it running. So they're not going to. They're just not. It's not going to be viable for them. Nobody's going to be buying it then, and the people who have spent £35 are just going to have an unusable shell of a game.
Yeah, it's so odd. I was thinking about what other games could possibly come to this service, and I think Control's kind of an ideal one. It's a bite-sized game. If you have something like Final Fantasy 15, which at the moment has a pocket version on Switch, but if that were to come via streaming, I'd feel kind of an odd position to even play that, because it's quite a lengthy game, and if you're putting in such a commitment to something that you eventually will just disappear, there's kind of an empty feeling to that, whereas Control's kind of like a one-and-done thing, but a big RPG, I'd kind of feel robbed if that eventually went away.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've recently been playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and I was just thinking, sort of how would this work, in a cloud-based system like this? And whilst I think it could work, certainly the online, I don't know whether the story mode because of the same reason, but the online mode, if it's an online game where you need that internet connection, I would say, sort of fair game, but at the same time, there are so many online games that require really decent internet connection and good performance. Certainly first-person shooters, for example. I don't really see them feasibly coming over in this sort of form, but those are the sort of games that, the online specific ones that would really benefit from this sort of thing. It's a very sort of, it's a very awkward crossroads in many ways, where people will probably want to play Control in, 20 years' time. People will probably, oh, Control, I've heard that's a really good game, I'll go and pick it up. But it's not going to be, I imagine as soon as the servers go offline, it will be removed from the eShop, because that would be very bad if they didn't. But even then, you won't be able to play it on the Switch, and if the Switch is what you've got, you're a bit stuffed. And more so the people who have bought the game, and then, sort of they can't play it later on. There's
so many pros and cons. They kind of weigh each other out at some points, but the cons just feel so much higher. I will say one big thing I love about xCloud as well, actually, is online, you actually run from Microsoft servers, because they're the ones streaming the game, so your connection is their connection. So when you're playing online, your ping is ridiculously good. So if they were to do an online-only game and bring it to Switch via cloud, like say that they did Call of Duty or something, technically everyone would have a good online connection, just your connection to the game is the issue. So I think actually that might work pretty well.
Yeah, provided, of course, that the input latency, I mean, I know you say the ping, but even then, these are the sort of games where people are trying everything they possibly can to reduce, to get as many milliseconds off their input lag as they possibly can. People are talking, you wouldn't use a TV for a game like that. Well, actually, a lot of people would. That's a really bad example. But the people who take it really seriously, they wouldn't. They would use a monitor, a PC monitor, because the input latency is usually so much better. But then having said that, if you were to do it on the Switch and do it handheld, the input latency would be the best, because there's not even any decoding, in the same way with the screen. The screen is natively in there. But then it's 720p. This is a minefield, isn't it?
It really is. And my biggest fear is we get games that could have run on the Switch, and they just don't. They come in a cloud version. Like, let's say, I don't know, like Dragon Quest 12's coming up, and let's say it looks in line with 11, but they don't put it on Switch because the cloud would be cheaper. That's my fear. I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I think that is as a sort of an occasional curiosity, these cloud versions are fine, but they're never going to be the best way to play the game. At least not on the Switch and not in the current environment. Who knows what the future will bring, of course. And it may well be that the future is all streaming all the time. But I mean, even if you look at, films and things like that, everyone streams far more than they watch DVDs and Blu-rays and things like that. But the Blu-rays and the DVDs still get released. Admittedly, it's a completely different ballgame when it comes to development, because you have to create a game for the Switch. You can't just, drag and drop, the same one. And to a degree, the same with Blu-ray and DVD, but even then, it is way more just like audio balancing issues and things like that, from what I understand, which admittedly I'm not an expert on the subject again. But even so, these versions still exist, and people still buy them. And to be honest, if I really, really want to see a film, I'll buy the physical media, because then I know that I can watch it. I don't have to think, oh, is it on Netflix? Is it on Amazon Prime? Is it on other streaming services that are available? It's there. And I can then just, what I do, I'll just pop it into my, my HTPC, rip it, and then I can watch it at my leisure at any time. And I've always got that physical backup there until the disc rots. But that's a different argument. But even so, I still think people want that physical media. And even if it's a digital download, as stupid as that sounds, but those permanent versions that are local, locked in, that will never be disabled, except by a very mean company that may do it, but that doesn't exist yet, thankfully. But I think that's going to stay. For the time being, at least, I think we're stuck in that area, and I'm happy to be stuck.
Especially in games where just buying a game is a big commitment. £35, £50, that's so much more than a movie. But yeah, it does seem like we have a pretty good position at the moment. We have mostly physical and just the occasional cloud version, and if it exists as an option, that's absolutely fine by me. And the tech that Control has shown us, I'm pretty impressed. Like, there's definitely room for improvement, but I could play this. I could probably do a complete playthrough of Control, in performance mode at least, and I think I'd still experience the core of the game in the same way that someone playing natively would.
Yeah, I believe you would as well, and that I think that is the very core of the issue overall. Can you have the same experience? And I think, yes, I think they've actually done well. I do think that they're charging perhaps a little bit too much.
It should be discounted. It should definitely be less than what it is on other consoles.
It should be, because you are getting what is inherently a lesser version of the game. It is running on considerably... Well, it's not running on considerably less powerful hardware. That's the thing. It's running server-side. You have no control over that, if you'll pardon the pun. And if those frame drops we saw were actually performance issues on the server side of things, that's not very encouraging, to be brutally honest. I do think that for the price and for the game and for the method in which it's being delivered, you should reasonably be able to, from a server-side point of view, be getting nigh on flawless gameplay, certainly to the same degree as other systems. I don't know whether other systems do have performance issues, but I would like to think not as major as we've been seeing here.
And hopefully going to the next generation, perhaps we'll be seeing even more complex games that would never come to the Switch streamed via the service, and hopefully if that happens, they have a much more up-to-date hardware on the server side.
Hopefully. Maybe, who knows, maybe we'll get Cyberpunk 2077 after all.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine anyone getting Cyberpunk at this point? No, that's unfair. No, I must admit, I'm still actually kind of holding out hope that Cyberpunk is going to come natively to the Switch after Witcher 3, even if it's like 5 years away. But that would be...
It'd be impressive.
That would be impressive, wouldn't it? But my god, we've seen it done with Witcher 3, which I know is a much older game, but even so.
And maybe one day, xCloud could finally come to Switch, bringing us something far more robust than just these one-off apps. I guess that's probably more Nintendo's court at the moment, because I'm sure they probably don't want xCloud kind of replacing their own library. But if that were to happen, that'd be Halo on Switch.
Oh, don't. Halo on Switch. I miss Halo. I miss Halo so badly, but I cannot justify buying an online subscription, considering my Xbox gets turned on once every 3 months or something. That's to fair. Occasionally pick up Banjo. Yeah. But yeah, I think that about sums it up. So, John, thank you for coming along, as always, and thank you so much for watching. Before I say all that, though, let us know your thoughts down there in the comments. I forgot to say that. But yes, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you control your mouse and move it towards that subscribe button. And be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.